Good evening. That's the chant of the marching, and of course, that song says human life, sacrifice, security satisfied, or what it says, authority, no, security fortified, and authority satisfied with a brutal state of anger. And that's, of course, the sounds of Sipho Hot Sticks Mabuse, remembering 1976, saluting 1976, where the day of an African child is derived from. It's the day that we, as the African children, get to come alive, we get to shine. So tonight we speak about the African child. We speak about that African child. Where to from here? Where to from here? The great. A child from a great continent, they say it's the cradle of humanity, is where it all starts. The richest continent on earth, yet poor at the same time. Where to, African child, where to? Of course, tonight we speak to JHK, John Hafeni Kamati, counselor, inspirational speaker, coach, as well as pastor. And we're just going to take a conversation and have a conversation around that. Before we do that, let's quickly take a look at the numbers, and the numbers are sitting at 8.3 million, 39,829. And of course, the deaths are sitting at 448,420. And then you're looking at the recovery sitting at 4.3 million, 63,316. And the numbers in terms of active cases, you've got about 3.5 million active cases, and only 2% of those are serious or critical, whereas 98% are currently all sitting on mild conditions. 91% of the closed cases have actually resulted in recoveries or discharge. So about 4.3 million people have actually survived COVID-19. Now, I would love to take a look at all the countries. Won't be able to take a look at all the countries. I just would love to indicate that the US still remains on top with 2.2 million cases, and South Africa has increased its cases to 80,412. And of course, the death rate there has also increased by 49% in the last 24 hours. So it's now sitting at 1,674. And what we want to go to is Namibia. Of course, there's a lot that has been happening in Namibia. A few minutes ago, we just received that Namibia has increased its cases. That's to about 36, if I'm not mistaken. Namibia has now increased its cases to 36. That is what the Minister of Health is indicating. This is, of course, 2 new cases. Well, there is, of course, 2 new cases. There's a whole lot of controversy around the mere fact that some cases might have been in contact and issues of infidelity, but we will still find out more. We can't confirm the issues of infidelity around that, but once we have confirmed, there is, of course, an indication that they could have been contact due to a secret love that could ultimately put the country under a lot of pressure. Commerce, we still are trying to find out whether commerce is going to go on lockdown. We have not confirmed that yet, but we will definitely be able to find out from you whether there is going to be a lockdown happening. But that is just in terms of our numbers. What is good also to indicate is that Namibia has increased its recovery cases to 19 recovered cases and 17 active cases with one serious. You've heard the minister saying that the one is still in ICU, the serious case is still in ICU, but sort of breathing independently now, or breathing better. The condition has improved. Just shy of 6,000 tests, and we wait on more to get those figures so that we are able to indicate and speak about what is really going to happen in Namibia. But tonight we speak about that African child. African child, where are you? African child, where to? there's a lot. There's Agenda 63. Maybe we will hear Agenda 63 from John H. Kamati. African Child, where to? Maybe we will hear our own reality TVs that take us to the village, where we are no longer going to be looking at Hollywood and other things as a way of interact or showcasing what we have in Africa. Where to, African Child? That is the question that is being asked. And tonight, as we're speaking to John Hafeni Kamati, we say, what the group that?
Oh, not group one. What the group two now?
Are you sure?
Yeah, lo.
Oh, the show muharo waliwa.
Muharo waliwa lela.
Na puendasha.
Ayo kolo nango ne ni makati ke tutu detainde.
Oege te pianek.
Te tu pianek. Tunango ni wakati tori humbate ni nawa. We need to look after ourselves.
Mala, mui avere un batane na ndu ditano batukuchani e komba yoko kunu june.
Hashono sho.
Takutingo nembera movengo veneta taviva kerepo.
Upoteneo vanwanu yavo duko shukujoshi manenge ngeshakani ngashi anoponeta akapenduka. Shukwepo kupenduka peife tukaletwa pashuka. Turi humbateni na wapo tu pongo tuhupe.
Yeah.
Onkifyo kaushinano mashenjo. Ano bahapu tavafimunyu ningashingoto yoshilesha.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So African Child.
Yes,
speaking about the African Child, that yesterday was the day of an African Child. It's a day with some quite good history.
Yes.
Not good histories in a sense of what has transpired. It's sort of a bittersweet history because the day signifies the youth of Africa standing up.
Yeah.
We could say the youth of South Africa, but it kind of sparked that the African youth looks at that example to be able to stand up. We're seeing so much happening with the African child so far. In your view, before we just get into the where to from here now.
Yes.
What does the day signify to you? You were there. You in that time. You were alive, a young man.
Yes.
So what does the day signify to you?
Thank you. I think the day is very significant, at least for us that grew up. I remember I was still a young boy in what we now would call grade 6, 1976. I was still at primary school, but very much aware of, because we grew up during the apartheid regime, although what has happened in South Africa was not in so many ways far removed from us. I guess it's just in the sense that it hasn't happened to the extent that we have seen in June 16 in Soweto. So it's a very significant historical day because it also then marks really the expression of what is it now?
Self-determination.
Self-determination and resistance really to the oppressive system of apartheid. But I think also what is significant in itself beyond just that, it also really became a point where the rights of the African child and the African youth, the African future, the potential that lies in this continent, also were highlighted. You know, young people. Hector Peterson, as you know, became the
sort of the symbol of
1976. But many other young people. Just this afternoon, I was watching a video that went viral, not viral, but that was on social media. And it really showed the violence of how children were beaten up. Youth, the police, full force, coming down on the young people to really beat them up, put them in the police vans, and with guns and all that kind of thing. Beyond South Africa, I think Namibia, also really had a very significant place. I think it was also very significant for Namibia because I remember 1976 at schools here like Martin Luther High School, I think, which was a church school. We were just talking earlier that your uncle
Yeah.
was a teacher. He actually taught me.
My great uncle
Your great uncle.
was the teacher and principal there.
Yeah, I went to Martin Luther in 1978, and the two classes before me, a lot of people, including I think one of your uncles that was my senior at Martin Luther, actually had an exodus into getting into exile. And many people that we see, while I'm talking on that, also I would maybe just want to extend my condolences to the late, to the family of the late Dr. Nkandi, who also used to be my colleague at Martin Luther High School, and they were also part of the exodus that went from 78 into exile, and of course came back to contribute greatly to the liberation or to the independent Namibia. So because of our close interconnectedness to South Africa, you find that spillover was also very much experienced in Namibia, and there was a large exodus of young people that went into exile to join the liberation struggle. Some of us were still small. I mean, well, not as small, but a lot of our colleagues of our age in that time also went into exile. And many of them have come back to really make contributions. The significance hereof, I think, beyond just South Africa and beyond Namibia or Southern Africa, is that when we look at the African child, when I say the African child, Africa currently in the world has got the largest youthful population.
Yeah.
You have over 400 million, a population of over 400 million of between 15 and 35 years of age in Africa. So Africa, therefore, has a serious and a great potential and a great resource of human capital in the youth that is in our continent. I must say that one of the things...
So are we saying that the youth are the ones that are going to be driving the African agenda?
It's not that they are the ones that are going to. They must be the ones that are going to drive the African agenda. You have more youth in this continent than you have in any other continent. Other nations now, European countries, and I see even Asia now, China is starting to introduce more children because population balance is being challenged because of birth control and so on, and low birth rates that they have had in other nations. But significantly, Africa is the richest continent in the world in terms of mineral resources and in terms of just the wealth that the world uses, uranium, gold, diamonds, the material that is used in the what do they call the batteries that you use in cell phone technology that you find only in the area of DRC. I think Burundi, Rwanda.
There's cobalt as well. That the DRC carries.
Exactly. So now Africa has got a lot of wealth, not only in mineral resources, even arable land, which unfortunately most of it is really underutilized. So it's a continent that has the potential to be the breadbasket of the world in terms of food, as well as in terms of it has always been the supplier to the world.
Is the African youth really at the center stage of the world's decisions? Or is the African youth left out? Is this African child sitting on the bench while everybody else is playing?
I think the unfortunate reality in Africa that we see, in my own humble opinion, is that for a continent with such a large potential or large population of youth, it's sad to say that most of our leaders in government, from presidents to ministers, are really of a generation that is from the old school. Many of them still that have come from the generation of the liberation of this nation. I'm talking from the 60s. You still have leaders that are above 70, going into their 80s, that are still leading nations in this continent, which for me really brings a disconnect. Even when you have youth ministers, they are already in their second half of life. That is for me very sad. And in many cases also really indicate that the youth, there are programs, we spoke about the Agenda 2063, the AU initiative. We have the Ministry of Youth in Sport and Youth, and so on in Namibia. But I think in general, we see that the youth are very much out of the center stage.
They're on the bench.
In terms of decision, in terms of power, in terms of access to authority, with the matters that really affect them.
But do they also have access to resources? Because an African child today that would love to start a company, and that African child wants to grow that company, and that African child is saying, oh, I want to start a tech company and I want to build something here.
Yeah.
That African child then sits on the bench or ends up sitting with a situation of resources to be able to play with. You've got Silicon Valley, where there are venture capitalists that are sitting there and they are prepared to spend their money on the ideas of the American youth.
Yeah.
What is the African youth? Who do they run to? Who do they run to for this support? Whether it's financial or whether it's financial or just on a mentorship level.
I think I'm probably not 100% qualified to speak on what is really available, but I think the facts on the continent and the facts on the ground, when we see the amount of youth and young people that are really in a destitute situation and that are not in schools, that don't have access to, though they have the mental and the dreams, but the systems in terms of financial resources or access to capital is very limited, I think, on this African continent. I would not want to disregard the fact that governments have taken initiatives, like we have the Ministry of Youth here, we have the National Youth Service. There are some of these initiatives, which in my opinion are good, but also need to be reviewed to become much more relevant. When you talk of tech, National Youth Service is not providing that.
Okay.
When you talk,
and I want us to come back to looking at the African youth and how the African youth is going to grow and how this African youth is going to grow in tech, how the African youth is going to grow in finance, how the African youth is going to grow. But I want to first start off with this African youth. Is the African youth principled enough not to be swayed? Is the African youth ngashi awambohati anyasho vaninga pomarando mbongo ninge anyasha ovyofika lela vokilila? Are they standing for the principles that we as Africans must have, or have we become too loose enough to be swayed?
The reality on the ground is that with the whole concept of the global of the globalization and the global village, or as things are becoming more merged, and also the sad reality of the fact that the African continent and the African people in most parts were deculturalized through the colonial intervention of our heritage. We find that there's a very big erosion of our identity and culture, to the extent that this especially last century and into this century, we see that there is a lot of erosion of those values that we would say are rooted in Ubuntu, or cultural values that are very much part of where we come from. I think that's a reality we need to recognize, that there is an erosion of values that can be very helpful in terms of discipline, in terms of outlook towards life and so on. But at the same time, modernization, the evolving of nations has also opened up many other opportunities. The big problem that I have seen, or that I see, I do counseling, as you know. I'm a counselor. I do mentorship for young people, as well as executives and other people. And just in the community generally. One thing I have noticed in our nation, in particular in Africa, I am starting to see a disconnect between the senior generation. When I'm talking of senior generation, I'm just talking between the born frees, is it now the millennials?
Well,
Yeah,
born frees and millennials.
Yes, we call them.
I don't know which is which one.
And the baby boomers.
Yeah.
For example, you find people that they grew up in this nation. They grew up in a very traditional or even exposed way, but still with a lot of African values. Went maybe to study, went into exile, exposed to other cultures, came back, and now we bring up our children in a completely different mindset than we were growing up. So then we find that there is this disconnect. The values that we espouse, which we have not translated to the younger generation, that becomes a frustration to the younger ones and also to the elders. And I think that is something that we need to intentionally look at by way of introspecting and say, hey, let's regroup and start to really have an intentional approach as to how we do life and how we pass on the values to the next generation. I want to put in here an example of a nation that I think is doing very well in that context, managing modernization, managing this whole globalization, but also at the same time maintaining and consciously also instilling values that are very much what is the word I'm looking for? That are very much rooted in their culture. It is, despite their history, where they are coming from. I had a little bit of exposure to this nation, and in my opinion, I think Rwanda is doing well. Tech-wise, they are advancing. They are still maintaining their language, but they are very much aligned purposefully with development. That is because the government has an intentional program that is aimed at empowering the next generation through education, through creating true opportunities that give them access to resources and to finances. They've got what they call the Rwanda Development Corporation, which is doing very well. I think you can Google it and check it out.
Very much well.
You can check it up. But also, what I like about the Rwandan government is that they have an intentional, conscious plan to invest in the next generation. They operate on a principle, I think, on a plan that is loosely called, although it's not always announced, which is actually spiritually and Christian inspired. It's called the Peace Plan.
Yeah.
And they work on the peace is an acronym that stands for Planned Reconciliation Churches. That was inspired from the fact that they came out of the genocide, and they used the church as an instrument of reconciling people. And it's amazing.
They've got a thing they call
I know what you are. I've been part of that.
Muganda or something.
I was there last year. We'll get to that one. It's called Umuganda.
Umuganda.
And that has inspired me also to start something similarly here, which we'll talk about, I hope, within the course of the program. Planned Reconciliation Churches. The next E stands for Equip 7 Leaders. That is the Equip 7 Leaders. In other words, the government has got a definite program and agenda that is rooted in servant leadership. That is one thing that Africa has missed in many cases. The other A stands for Assist the Needy. In other words, programs and facilities that are available for looking after people that are in need across the sector of the economy, of the community and the economy. And then C, care for the sick, and the last E, which is very important, educate the next generation. So now that becomes part of a drive. That is why for example, Rwanda today, I'm just using that as an example. In fact, they can make me an ambassador, I believe. Because we need to celebrate success. We need to celebrate and emulate and learn from one another. That is why Rwanda has placed a satellite in orbit, so that every child has got access to internet facilities in the nation that is coming via satellite. Yeah, and have access to solar-powered, laptops.
Laptops.
So that is a very classic example of a nation that has got an agenda and a leadership that has got an agenda that goes beyond talking and just talking plans without implementation. I think that is one of Africa's biggest challenge, is implementation of all these good ideas with actual funding and putting our money where our mouth is.
You're speaking about implementation, and I have to announce, and I think I have to say it. Very important to say it is that the access to information bill has been tabled this afternoon by the Minister of ICT. We spent 5 years pushing this draft or the bill, and finally it has gone to Parliament. It has been a struggle, but remember, before that, I think 12 years before that, before we finally got the bill in a draft form, there was that struggle of just getting people to accept that there's a need for access to information.
Yeah, yeah.
And you speaking about implementation, and I mean, we're looking at just an example as this one, access to information.
Yeah.
A nation needs to make a judgment call.
Yes.
How does a nation make a judgment call when that it doesn't have the relevant information to be able to do so? And I'm seeing this a lot with a lot of the African child, very misled at times because they absolutely have no idea what they're dealing with. So now you find yourself where, for example, somebody has been putting out this information about this memes that they've been putting of Ohorongo cement and putting it next to Ohorongo cement next to Brazilian
other commodities that are,
which is 3,000, and then Ohorongo cement they would say it's $99.95, and then they would put a Hennessy, a cognac bottle there, and they would indicate this is 500. And this is only this much. And somebody is sitting there and thinking and saying, do you know the value of the stuff that you purchase that are sort of insignificant to you? Because you could be buying your own cement to build your mother's house in the village. To build yourself a room or a house in the village. That tells you how many young people have an idea how much it costs to buy a house, and what the process are to buy a house, to buy a plot and build on that plot. How many of them know that value there? Because there's a lack of information, and we are living in an information era. The African child, are they equipped enough in terms of information to be able to make the relevant or the right decision to push them forward, to take them to the next level? You're talking about all these beautiful things with Rwanda. What about the child in Havana? What about the child in Kivuku land? What about the child in Oneshila?
Yes.
What about the child in Tumkwe? And we can mention them all.
Yes.
Kaisose. What about all those children? Divundu.
Yeah.
How well equipped are they to make a decision at the moment? Be it financially, politically, or just life?
Well, I think, my dear brother Josie, we need to take cue, or rather we need to take ownership of our nation.
Yeah.
And a lot of things that I said before, like I mentioned before to you, that one of the things I've discovered is that there is a certain disconnect you find between generations. That's because we have evolved. But as a government, as leaders, as people that have the interests of this country at heart, I want to put this squarely in our leadership. And when I'm talking leadership, well, at the end of the day, political, the government actually is the one that activates the machinery. But also, us as the Namibian people, the churches, the civil societies, the organizations that have got youth organizations, we need to also come on board. But information is really also linked to access to education.
Yeah.
The question that I would want to ask is really, in as much as we have all these good ideas and dreams, remember that every child is a potential. Every child, every youth has got so many great dreams, but without education, the ability to read, the ability to be equipped to navigate life, to be able to be tech savvy, or just to be able to understand how to use a cell phone beyond just making calls. I would say that education is key. And I want to put that also very much at the door of our government, that we need to invest more. And we need to make facilities available to the remotest places in this nation. And invest in education, invest in raising teachers, in putting priority on the budgetary wise, putting resources available on educating and creating more teachers, and maybe even rethinking our education system. Exactly.
But the African youth then, or the African child sits there and says, but governments are not doing anything for us. Governments are not putting us at the forefront. Governments are not mentoring us either. They're not giving us an opportunity to learn from the elders.
Yeah.
You've got the elders. A classic example, situation in Burundi at the moment. President that passes away.
Young president
died of COVID.
May so rest in peace.
You are sitting there and you are asking yourself, the situation as it stands, do they have the health capacity to deal with COVID-19 if it spreads further? And that's the question that ultimately comes in, and you would want to ask that question over and over again. And then the African youth says, had you given us an opportunity, we would have been the doctors that would have been able to take care of you now.
Awesome. I think, all these things, I don't want to sound, I don't want to be negative in being, in just, what is the word? Criticizing. But I think I need to be honest enough to also acknowledge that we have missed it in so many ways, in terms of our priorities, of really, really investing in education and in specifically targeted skills that will enable our nation. I think we could have done better. We are doing, there's a lot of doctors being trained now all over in the world, but we have our medical school here and so on. But I am of the opinion that we could have invested a whole lot more in that sector. And actually in many other sectors. I worked in the airline for many years after independence. I've spent about 13 years in total in the airline industry. And I'm just diverting a little bit. I remember 1990 when we had our first inaugural flight to Harare, Zimbabwe, and we also had our inaugural flight to Lusaka. That's now Namib Air before it became Air Namibia. The one thing that really hit me in 1990 in Harare, we got to the airport, we had our function there as, for the inaugural flight. There were so many. In fact, I saw just Zimbabweans. The captains were Zimbabweans. Everybody was like, the Zimbabweans were running the airline. Very interesting. Just taking one little sector of the economy. Now here we are talking that maybe the government must stop bailing out Air Namibia. It's very sad to look at Air Namibia today still and look at how many pilots, how many aircraft engineers do we have. You can check it yourself. We still have a lot of people that we import to do some of these jobs for us. So we need to have now, we have now come, we have made mistakes, we have not perhaps set our priorities right from where we come from where we are now. I think we need to have a plan that is intentional, that is purposefully thought out, and have an agenda to equip and empower the next generation, or actually the generation that is now here. Because I also have an issue with this thing of saying that the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. Leadership can be implemented right now, but it must be availed. It must be facilitated, and empowerment must be there within the system.
We're seeing, I think there are about three young leaders at the moment that are sitting in Parliament. Deputy Minister of ICT, and then I think you've got one from, I think you've got two actually from PDM, and I think one from LPM.
Yes.
So these are youth leaders that you are looking at that have sort of taken the space, and that you're looking at the debates that they're putting out there in Parliament. The way they are carrying themselves also shows that young people can actually do it. They can actually do it.
Of course.
Where to from here for the African child? Where does the African child go from here?
I think number one, beyond. Let's look at this thing this way. We have to recognize that governments have a responsibility, because that is where the money of the nation is generated from. Look at other nations, China, look at Korea, look at South Korea, Singapore. You can look at Finland right now, which also doesn't have much resources, but has invested in their education system and have got the youngest and youngest parliamentarians or leaders ministers in government, and also female. Those things were implemented with an intention, with a plan, and with a vision. We need to look beyond the politics of being stuck with liberation. We need to move beyond just celebrating liberation all the time. We talk about economic independence. It's not a struggle, and I think we need to move away from that mindset and take ownership now of the resources we have. We have the resources. We can plan who we sell it to. We don't have to be at the whims of, because we have the bargaining power, rather than just always being at the receiving end or at the begging end. So that requires a transformation and a revolutionary leadership, which I think necessitate really that young people, but dynamic, visionary young leaders comes in. But also another thing we need to do is we need to also network and align beyond just Namibia. We need to start to think broader as blocks, and we need to start to think broader as a continent, and really also recognize that indeed the world is global, but we need to align with like-minded and learn and cross-pollinate one another. But I believe there is a definite need for young leadership to come in, but also the unfortunate thing that I'm seeing even in our setting, given what has happened not so long ago in our own parliament, dynamic young people coming in, very eloquent, but definitely lacking what I would call in the church discipleship. Being disciplined in the ways that we want to go to. Again, I'm a big fan of Rwanda. The leadership, the oldest people in leadership, I think the president himself is one of the oldest, but he has placed under him a lot of youthful leaders, but they have also invested in these leaders via education, have been groomed, worked in, have been exposed to international institutions. I just want to take a little example. For example, I checked, the lady that is running, I'm not sure that she's still in charge there, but there's a lady that is in charge of the Rwanda Development Corporation. I think, is it RDC? Rwanda Development Corporation, I think. Or is it 39? I think she's only 40 now.
Yeah.
But her track record, you can check it on LinkedIn or wherever, for the last 15 or so years, she has been in the system, being groomed. So now when they implement their policies and when they implement strategies, or plans, you have people that have grown up in the system without so much being caught up in the politics of the ambitious side of politics and so on. I think we need to definitely realize that transition is necessary.
But there's an argument that says that African youth are somewhat moving back to where we lost the land, where Africa lost the land.
African youth?
African young people have seemed not to care about politics. They seem not to be interested in politics, up to a level where that if we start talking about sex, they will all flock and come and listen. But when we start talking about things of developing the African youth, then they all sit back and say, demons is boring. These people are boring.
I think some of those things are a manifestation of the social construction as we have evolved. Remember when I was saying earlier that we have a generation of leaders that are way in their senior years. That, and I must say it, and I think we need to recognize that we have failed the younger generation because the previous generation has the responsibility of transferring knowledge, creating opportunities, and facilitating for the upcoming generation so that there can be a transition. We are talking of Agenda 2063.
Yeah.
All the leaders, including myself, I mean, I'm almost 60. By the time that 63 comes, most of us will have been gone. And yet these agendas are being set for a generation that is so way advanced in terms of just what they are exposed to by technology. Maybe not all of the youth, but that's the disconnect I'm saying. So there must be a definite, conscious, purposeful engagement and engaging of young people. Maybe it's even time we start to think beyond political parties, beyond political lines, and really start to realize that those things are actually not necessarily anymore truly
important,
as important, because what is important today is land, is bread and butter issues, is education. All of us, we need it. So I think there is a need for a shift, that we must start to look beyond that. And that, again, let me go back to Rwanda. I was there in February, and I was amazed to find that the number 2, who is the president of the Senate, is actually from the opposition party. But the president set him as the number 2. I said, how awesome can this be? I like what our president has done now with the inclusion of the deputy minister of health, who's also coming from a small opposition party or smaller party. I love that. But I think we need to start to move consciously beyond that. And maybe we can even pacify the kind of exchanges that has taken place in parliament. Last week we were speaking about this. I wasn't particularly happy about that interaction, but I think those things can be pacified if we listen to one another and truly create platforms that can enable us to make a difference. Sometimes those kind of things are also indication of frustrations. It's just like being in a home. So, and now we are saying, young people, the African youth, is not, you were just saying, they are not
interested
attention.
in politics, they are not interested in development issues. Only a few.
Yeah, because I think when we look Africa, the unfortunate thing.
Because that was the argument that Julius Malema also made. not so long ago when he said, you are crying about alcohol. You
Yeah.
are crying about alcohol.
Yeah.
You people were begging for money to buy food when lockdown was happening.
Exactly.
When alcohol opens, you are the ones that are standing in the queue.
Man,
And you are buying alcohol. And this was the argument that Julius Malema had. This is what has happened to the African youth.
Is it-
We are now celebrating the reopening of alcohol outlets.
let me put it.
And that's the youth that we are talking
No,
about.
we cannot blame the youth for access to alcohol. Who gives the licenses for shebeens? Who gives the licenses for gambling houses? Who makes in our country, in this Windhoek alone, you have more access to shebeens that are legal. Go to Evelyn. Evelyn Street is not supposed to be a bar. What is
Street.
it? Street. It's a residential street. Now people are growing up there because the municipality and the government has made this facility available. That yes, you can have a toilet and you can still sell alcohol at your home. We need leaders that says no, stop this thing. Change it. Create platforms and avenues that will teach and empower people to do business that is enriching and adding value to the community. The alcohol business, which is really where our community, especially the black community, given the historical dynamics, everybody or the majority of the people think that the only entry point into business, you need to have a what we say a kabashu now, or you need to have a shebeen, or at least sell alcohol. What does that say of the fabric of the society? It means that young people are more exposed to alcohol. It's not building them up. They fall out of school. I do a lot of motivation and stuff in schools. The greatest problems that the teachers have is drug addiction now, even among girls. It is the kids are taking drugs even at school. They're smoking and they're taking alcohol and teenage pregnancies.
But maybe we've normalized it.
That's what I'm saying. We need to take ownership. We cannot say that we can, I say that when we talk about this COVID thing, we are now challenged with denormalizing the normal and normalizing the abnormal. And we call it the new normal. Let us set the agenda for what is normal.
Okay, let us go set the agenda for what is normal, and we're also indicating that if you want to be a part of the conversation, I think we've got a couple of more minutes. You can be part of the conversation. 0812850859, 0812850859. You can, of course, interact with us right here on Inspire to Grow. We are inspiring to grow, and I think that was that's the last thought there from JHK. The new normal.
Denormalizing the norm. What we had known as normal is being denormalized.
Yeah.
And we are now normalizing the abnormal, going around with masks. Social distance. Well, that's becoming the new normal. But it should also give us the opportunity to introspect.
It has somewhat, some are saying that has literally decreased the influenza. Flu season has started. There seems to be less flu cases that are coming out because of the fact many people are taking care of themselves, washing their hands, they're wearing masks, they're sort of keeping warm. All of those things are coming out. And people are saying it's because of that. Because of COVID, we are also now taking care of the other sicknesses.
You speak something that is such a contradiction and a paradoxical, I think, expression in itself, if that's the right way to say it. Maybe this is one reason we can say thank you to COVID.
Yeah.
But social behavior that is self-preserving is not something that should be imposed to us by COVID.
Yeah.
Those values are learned in school, they are learned at home, they are enforced by the law even. You know, and that's what I'm saying. We need to get back to a purposeful agenda that really creates a society that is responsible. I also here need to say that church has a large part to play in terms of creating values, in terms of enforcing values. The Christian faith has got all these ethics about work, about honor, about discipline, and about being spiritually connected to your maker. Churches have a large role to play there, and I think everybody, I like to have this proposition that we cannot live in isolation and in silos. That the three institutions that are very much engaged with the entire population is your government, is business, and is church. And there is a platform that we can work together. That's a conversation for another day.
Is the African youth or the African child disciplined?
We are not
in all aspects.
I think
disciplined enough to be able to wake up on time, disciplined enough to be able to commit, disciplined enough to be able to respect, or having that discipline to be able to have the respect for the elders. Is the African child still disciplined, or have the discipline gone out the window?
I think we see a lot of, especially in Southern Africa, I'm talking of Namibia, I'm talking of maybe South Africa, where we see a lot of these weird things that happens, baby dumping, a lot of drug abuse, suicides, and very weird behaviors that we see as a result of the deconstruction, really, of not deconstruction, but as a result of the breakdown of society values, which I will not point squarely on the youth. I think we need to take ownership collectively as a nation, and I think the responsibility for that should come squarely to the senior generation and those that are running the agenda of development in the country. Yet, I want to say here, it is posing an opportunity for the churches. It's posing an opportunity particularly for the youth themselves that are progressive, that have got vision, that have got ambition, to now also organize themselves, make use of the opportunities that the system also provide for, and come up vocally. I was saying earlier, we are so much stuck in always independence celebration. Everything is this, it's all rooted in celebration. Maybe it's time that the young people start also to apply the same principles that our elders have applied in gaining independence. And I'm not talking about destroying and destructive behavior, but I'm talking about purposeful arising to a common ideal that is looking towards the future, the empowerment of the next generation to come and the current generation. I think young people, we are in need of the new Martin Luthers. We need the Mandelas. We need the Toivos in this generation to arise. And it's not about politics. It's about life, it's about purpose, and it's about living. Okay. I think we need to change our mindset.
The African child needs to change their mindset. There is a lot that is currently happening in the diaspora.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, with the U.S. Having these issues around racism that is cropping up in the U.S.
Yes.
Because of police brutality. Now, I wanted to find out with that. And then saying and looking at the situation because of the targeting of what many would call as the African American. Mm-hmm. There's also the African American youth that is under attack. I was watching a video of Kanye West, mm-hmm. and Kanye West has gotten a lot of flack about the fact that about some of the things that he says, and I kind of like, I'm also one of those rebellious thinkers in a sense that I don't conform to this thinking that just because everybody's going that way, I must just follow.
That's what I'm saying.
I can't just follow.
Yeah.
Now, Kanye West is talking about the fact that, his dream of being somewhere, his dream of pushing himself to the next level, his dream of being, and he said this, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and this video kind of reminded me how people can reach there. And he was talking about that, I know about the quality of material. I've studied it. I've spent time to study all of this, to understand what it is, how people dress. And I took a purposeful decision to go and study so that I get an idea of what this thing is, because I wanted to get into it. I wanted to create my own. And Kanye West has created that. But he mentioned something very interesting. The opportunity that he was given. The opportunity that he was given by Damon Dash and Jay-Z allowed him to be able to further his dream. He says, if that opportunity had not happened, if that moment had not happened, as great as he is, he might not have been able to move on to the next level because that opportunity had opened up for him.
Yes, sir.
For other people to be able to see, hey, if Jay-Z or Damon Dash is looking at that boy, something must be worthwhile with him. Can we take a look at him? Where someone creates this purpose or sort of this opening for someone else, opens the door for someone else to the next level.
Yeah.
We find ourselves having great businessmen and great businessmen and women in this country. But we also find ourselves lacking mentors in all essence.
Exactly.
Quite a few business mentors that are prepared to engage with young people and say, hey, in business, this is what I've done. This is what I haven't done. You need to take the opportunity to look at that.
Exactly.
How does the African child grow in business when there's a lack of mentors?
That's why I'm saying the previous generation has a responsibility to the generations to come. I'm trying to, but I hope I'm making sense. We in this generation have a responsibility for those that we are raising. The next generation should always be better. They should be greater. They should do better because we sow into them. And these things come therefore as part of a purposeful agenda to invest in the next generation. Other nations...
But that investment never happens.
Exactly, I recognize.
You find yourself going to a businessman and you saying, I would love you to look at this proposal of mine. This is what I want to do. In many cases, we've had cases where someone would simply steal a young person's business idea and make it his. Or they would simply play it down and say it will never make money.
Yeah.
Now, this happens, and it's happening all the time in Namibia. I don't know how else it's happening across Africa.
I think...
But it's a bit of a challenge when no one, if you have venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, in America, that are prepared to hear an idea and just pump the money in. Google, Microsoft.
Yes.
We can mention all of them. People took a chance on some young people. Facebook, some venture capitalists took a chance on this young people and said, we'll give you the money. We'll see your vision, but here's what we want. We would love to take up this equity, and this is where we want you to go. Build this up. We will support you through this period. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll be able to say, okay, fine, let's see how we can draw our money out of it. I watched how this Silicon Valley sort of came to play. And you look at the different stories, they sort of had the same storyline, where someone was prepared to put the money in.
We are relational beings. Economies, societies cannot function outside of themselves. When I'm saying that outside of themselves, we cannot function in isolation. And that is a realization that we need to come to grips with very quickly, and with visionary leadership, put structures and systems in place that make that something that society will have to engage in. There is a very interesting book, and I think it's one of the